maybe the most important thing to know is that we get to essentially rewire and regulate our nervous systems throughout our lifespan. And that's why we can tune into and tap into other people that have that robust resource for us and that we're here for each other. It becomes this really beautiful cycle of giving and receiving co-regulation. And in that process, elevating each other to what I think is our greatest potential.
Mm. Welcome to the Everyday Epigenetics, raw, real, relatable podcast. We're your hosts, Susan Robbins, certified epigenetic human performance coach,
and Kate King, licensed psychotherapist, board-certified art therapist, and award-winning author. Together, we bring two perspectives, two styles, and one shared passion for epigenetics.
On this podcast, we delve into topics such as environment, nutrition, fitness, mindset, social dynamics, and trauma as they pertain to epigenetic expression in a way that's relatable to everyone.
We recognize that everyone's needs are unique. There are no one-size-fits-all solutions for your mind, body, and heart. The true magic lies within you.
So if you're ready to create a radiant life through epigenetics and reclaim your authentic self, then buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Everyday Epigenetics, raw, real, relatable podcast. We are your hosts. I'm certified epigenetic human performance coach, Susan Robbins, and I am here with my fantastic co-host,
Kate King, licensed psychotherapist, board-certified art therapist, and award-winning author.
This is the place where we talk about everything lifestyle and environment and how it relates to our genetic expression. So today's episode and person, our guest, is one very close to Kate's heart. So I'm going to turn it over to Kate for the introduction for today.
Thank you, Susan. I'm really excited for you guys to have the time to listen to our incredible guest today, Dr. Arielle Schwartz. She's a kind of guru of all things polyvagal theory and trauma healing. In fact, I recently got her new workbook and I've been working through it. It's called the Polyvagal Theory Workbook for Trauma. There's so much wealth in her work. There's so much depth for the way that we can do our inner work and our healing and really befriend ourselves on so many levels, including the mind, body, and spirit. So I'll just read her short intro here and then we'll get into it. So Dr. Arielle Schwartz is a clinical psychologist, internationally sought-out teacher, and a leading voice in the healing of trauma. She's an internationally sought-out teacher, leading voice in the field of trauma recovery, and author of 7 books, including the Complex PTSD Workbook, the Post-Traumatic Growth Guidebook, and Applied Polyvagal Theory in Yoga, as well as the one I just mentioned, which is the Polyvagal Theory Workbook for Trauma. As the founder of the Center for Resilience-Informed Therapy, she offers a mind-body approach to therapy for trauma and informational mental health and wellness updates through her writing, public speaking, social media presence, and blog. She believes that the journey of trauma recovery is an awakening of the spiritual heart. And I love that piece, Dr. Schwartz, about the spiritual heart, because I think when we're talking about the vagus nerve, and it is so connected in with the physical heart, but there's an overlap there with the physical heart and the spiritual heart, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, thank you for inviting me and thank you for such a nice introduction. And that piece, to me, that sits at this kind of intersection that I often speak about in my work, which is where we can talk about science, but we don't want to miss the kind of embodied soma of the experience and also the soulful nature of this. So that there's a way in which if we break things down to its component parts, sometimes we miss the felt sense of the whole. Kind of if you were to study a violin and all of the parts that make a violin, the strings and the tension and the bow and the bridge, we might forget that it makes music.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, so this is our second in our series about the vagus nerve. And I think something that makes you really different than our first interview is your experience in polyvagal theory. So can you just give our listeners an understanding of what polyvagal theory is, how it incorporates the vagus nerve, but how it also expands maybe into different aspects of the body and how maybe you use it in your life and your practice?
Yeah. Yeah, lovely. So, the first thing to say is that there are multiple theories out there about vagal regulation. And basically, what vagal regulation means, if we think about the relationship between the vagus nerve and our overall mind body health and well being, the vagus nerve works with our brainstem to help us navigate things like our respiratory rate and our heart rate, our digestive rhythms, our sleep wake cycles. And the vagus nerve is considered to be this kind of mind-body superhighway of connection. Works with other cranial nerves. It's our 10th cranial nerve. Lots of info there. And there's quite a few theories about how the vagus nerve interrelates with our heart and our lungs, our breathing, our respiratory rate, and how that kind of helps get the brain into what we would call a coherent state or optimal heart rate variability that I won't go into because you just had a whole episode on that. But what maybe is unique about polyvagal theory from some of the other vagal regulation theories is that all of these theories look at how when we synchronize our breath and our heart rate, we can create this optimal zone that supports all of our biological rhythms and body temperature and all of this good stuff. The difference about the polyvagal theory is that it incorporates a social aspect. So instead of it simply being an internal process that we're going through, polyvagal theory recognizes that we have a social engagement system, a social circuit of the vagus nerve that takes in and gathers information from other people and our environment and the world around us. And so our nervous systems are responding to facial expressions and voice tone and body language and the basic feeling of a room or what we see on the news, what's happening in our world. And this idea of this kind of open circuit of the vagus nerve, to me, makes a lot of sense. It just has a lot of both therapeutic value, but also a very compassionate understanding as to why sometimes we can feel dysregulated when we're in environments or with people that are basically sending cues of threat to our nervous system. Polyvagal theory surmises that we're receiving those cues of threat non-consciously. We don't even sometimes consciously realize that we're responding to a facial expression or body language. Someone turns their shoulder, turns their gaze, turns away from us. Maybe it's a grimace on the face. Maybe it's, again, something that kind of passed by quickly in the news. And the next thing we know, our bodies are going into a bit of a threat response. Our heart rate is increasing, or we have more tension in the body, or we have a bad dream that night. We might not even know why. The bottom line that I really love about the polyvagal theory is that it helps us recognize that our bodies are doing the best job to help us navigate the complexity of our world. So, in some ways, it helps us have compassion when we do go into states of dysregulation.
Mhm. And you use yoga as a modality, is that right, to work with the vagus nerve? Can you explain how movement through yoga and breath work, and I don't know what elements in addition to those, maybe intention setting, chanting, I'm not sure. How does yoga help to tone the vagal nerve?
Yeah. So there's a few pieces that maybe are worth offering back out around some of the elements of polyvagal theory and vagal toning to answer that question. The first is that another key component of the polyvagal theory is this idea that we have multiple ways in which we might be responding to threat. And that in polyvagal theory, poly being multiple, vagal being vagal circuits, that we have more than one vagal circuit, one that is basically helping us respond to threat through social connection. If I can reestablish a sense of connection and safety through gazing at another, reaching for someone, calling out for help, and that's responded to, maybe I can resolve the threat that way. But if that doesn't work, then maybe we go into our sympathetic system. The sympathetic system is not a vagal process per se, but it's basically when the vagus nerve stops putting the brakes on that sympathetics, allowing us to go into maybe a fight flight response. And if we cannot get away from the threat, if we can't protect ourselves from it, then we might go into the third tier of responding, of a threat response, which is also driven by the vagus nerve. But rather than going into calm or rest and digest, sometimes the vagus nerve takes us into more of a shutdown or a withdrawal, a collapse, a feeling of fatigue or hopelessness, apathy. No matter what I do, it's not going to make a difference. So I'm not going to keep trying. Or even earlier than that, more driven by a kind of evolutionary way that our nervous system protects us by conserving energy. So in that case, our respiration rate really slows down, our heart rate really slows down, and we go into almost a hibernation of sorts.
Mhm.
Okay, so back to your question about yoga, right? So if we must start to some degree by knowing our nervous system. So I actually start in the yoga application of polyvagal theory into yoga with self-discovery practices. Like we we call this in yoga svadhyaya or self-understanding, self-knowledge. It's one of the niyamas in the yogic system. And we get to know what is our nervous system doing? What's it holding on our behalf? What nervous system state am I in? Am I in my sympathetic system? Am I in more of a collapse? Do I feel pretty present and centered and grounded? And from there, if we are in some kind of dysregulated nervous system state, the next layer of yogic intervention might be how do I actually bring myself back to center or equanimity or some quality of okayness? And we might use practices that we would call vagal toning practices to support that. That might be through the breath of rhythmic breathing, like we would see with coherence or resonance frequency breathing, creating optimal heart rate variability, which is that measure of vagal tone. Or we might work with self applied touch, where the vagus nerve comes close to the surface of our skin. And the vagus nerve works closely with the trigeminal nerve and other cranial nerves and gathers information from your face or between your eyebrows, around your eyes, around your cheekbones. We think our smile muscles here, and all around your ears. So, because the feeling of the face is so important for our nervous system to register, like I might mirror your face and in that process, your warm smile cultivates a warm smile in me. And now my nervous system is registering through that mirroring process. There's safety here between us. We're going to basically drop in and connect to that. So the feeling of the face is a very important component for the vagus nerve to do its job. And when we stimulate that with self massage between the eyebrows, under the eyes, under the cheekbones, and in the ears, we're basically giving input to the vagus nerve to do its job well.
Mm.
Yeah.
I have a question quickly before you move on. So much
Yes.
of what you're talking about sounds similar to mirror neurons and how they mirror back sort of an empathy response between people. Is there a connection between the vagus nerve and mirror neurons, or are they two different camps that are just on the same trajectory?
I'm gonna go with the latter there. I'm pretty confident that others have made that conscious link. I'm not sure that I've seen the robust research on that, but I feel like there just has to be a strong connection. One area that I can speak to with kind of greater confidence is that when we look at empathy and compassion that extends between us as people, the vagus nerve is a very strong component of both of those qualities. The ability to empathize with others essentially allows our vagus nerve to either go into greater calming because I'm attuning or sensing that those cues through eye contact and voice tone and so forth of safety, and my vagus nerve calms my body mind system. Conversely, sometimes we sense dysregulation in a loved one or in our child, right? In a friend. And sometimes our vagus nerve basically facilitates a felt experience of that. So I might join in a little bit of the dysregulation of the anxiety that someone else is feeling, or that despair or grief or shutdown that someone else is feeling. It's going to essentially help me know what someone else is feeling. But here's what Steve Porges offers around this, that too much empathy can be maladaptive. If we're joining to such a degree that our vagus nerve is basically not also helping us re regulate ourselves when we've met someone else in their dysregulation. So sometimes we'll get this feeling of kind of empathy being both a gift and a curse. Like too much empathy can lead us to feel worn out or fatigued at the end of the day, or the highly sensitive person can feel overwhelmed by too much empathy. So what he suggests with compassion is that what we're doing is basically attuning enough to know what someone else feels, and then re-regulating our own system so that we're coming back into what we'll call that regulation zone. And then we can be present with another and offer our cues of vagal regulation socially to another person, kind of like, well, he calls it co-regulation, but basically we're lending our vagus nerve socially to each other.
I have two questions.
Beautiful.
First one, I'm thinking when you're talking about these people that take on eh, the emotional parts, the empathy part of it, but I'm thinking about my people that I work with that are caretakers that they run on prolactin. They're the nurturers, and they literally hold on weight. They can serve other people's stresses. So is this also, and it really sends them into a spiral.
Yeah.
Is that also what you're talking about? Not just the people who are super sensitive to other people, but also these caretakers that care so deeply about their loved ones that this affects them as well, because you really see them go downhill and their HRV drops when
Mhm.
they can't be there, the weight stays on, cortisol levels rise. Is all
Mhm.
that also affected as well?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, really beautiful question. One language that we might have for this is also where caretaking rolls over into people pleasing or appeasement, or sometimes we refer to this as fawning, in which case we're actually hyper recruiting our social engagement system, our upper vagus nerve, to be so attuned to the other. But the kind of consequence of this is that we might not be attuning to our own body, our own needs, and I love when you named this quality of kind of running on prolactin or running on oxytocin, right? Like we're running on these feel good chemicals, but all of those are down regulating for the system. And it actually is a great segue into the other ways in which yoga can be helpful, because some yoga is deeply calming for the system, and it's going to run on that same like really deep slow rhythm of nurturance and nurturing oneself. But sometimes we go to yoga basically to get a little bit of a workout, and that's not a bad thing, right? There's a way in which when we're going into standing postures, warriors, sun salutations, what we're cultivating is elevated heart rate, or essentially we're going into a little bit of chosen challenge of the sympathetic nervous system. That's actually really good for someone that's running on prolactin, and I know you know this, right? Like, we actually need to periodically move out of that state, because the marker of healthy vagal tone is the ability to move between nervous system states. It's not always living in our parasympathetic nervous system.
No, I don't think it's possible for anybody to live 100% parasympathetic.
Yeah.
My and thank you for those answers. My other question is, because we're talking about so much connection here and connection, feeling safety, lack of connection. If you look back at 2020 and all the lack of connection and look at the stress people went through. So can you also connect that lack of connection to a threat that
Yeah.
the vagus nerve picks up?
Yeah. So this is an interesting question as well. So let's think about the kind of origins of what we'll call a stress response in relationship to social loss or social rejection. There is a interesting kind of wiring in the brain where there's shared neural circuitry between how our brain processes social rejection and social loss and how our brain processes pain, particularly nociceptive pain, or the pain that is much more of neural circuitry of pain that's associated with chronic pain, maybe not necessarily acute injury. And so, if we look at the origins of this kind of social response and pain response, we're going to roll all the way back to about 9 months old. Okay. And think about an infant, and what happens when we're 9 months old is a phase of separation anxiety. Every time my primary person walks out of the room, I go into distress and I let everybody know it. I'm going to cry until they come back. And what actually drives that is a pain response. Why would that be? If we think about the origin of our social engagement system and our vagus nerve and its role in kind of bonding with our caretakers, the eye contact, the facial expression, listening to voice tone as cues of safety and connection so that I can nurse and bond. I have to down regulate my system in order to do that. And and again, prolactin is a big part of this. Oxytocin is a big part of what basically allows immobilization in the context of safety for nursing and bonding. Now, an infant is highly dependent upon that primary caretaker. And when that caretaker leaves, it will feel like threat, possibly even life threat, depending on the circumstances, but certainly a sympathetic threat of, oh, no, 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 this is bad. This is not good. The person that I need to keep me safe in the world, because I don't know, there could be wolves or bears or tigers or lions,
Oh
right?
my.
Right, exactly. Out there. It's a very primitive mammalian response. And it's driven very much by the vagus nerve sensing the threat of that loss of my primary other. Now, let's fast forward from 9 months old into adulthood. One of the things that can happen, especially when we've experienced relational traumas in childhood, let's say that that primary caretaker was inconsistent or unreliable or scary to me, right? Or neglectful of me. And now I'm an adult and I go through another social loss. I go through some cutoff or I get ghosted. They don't text me back, right? The things that happen in our world. And it is very anxiety producing. We have that loss of vagal tone and very often literally painful. Yeah.
Yeah. So in that moment, an adult is operating from potentially a 9-month-old response that hasn't been healed. And with every iteration of some similar flavor of loss or rejection or threat, they go into that same desperate place of a baby feeling like maybe they could die if this person doesn't come back and take care of them.
Exactly. And it also, from a psychotherapeutic standpoint, we can look at that as parts work
Mhm.
and that different parts of us have different primary nervous system states.
Oh, yeah, that's really interesting. And depending on which part is most dominant or protective, we can be flooded by those protective parts and it can take us out of the present moment and we can project all kinds of imagined material or material from the past on relationships that actually don't carry any of that narrative. It's really just our memory or our fear that's projecting it onto something current.
Exactly. That's it.
Yeah.
Now, another question in my head because I'm the non-psychotherapist here, so I'm thinking of all things like reality and experiences of myself and clients. So, say the 9-month-old, lots of love. Everything was great. Then you get into the maybe they're 10, 11, preteen, early teens, and you have a parent die or you have parents split. So even though the vagus nerve has been doing well and nurtured up to that point, the brakes are on, the brakes are off, things are smooth. And then you have a major trauma come in at that point. That also is what will we carry into those later years that start to manifest, correct?
Yes. I'll offer a few kind of curiosities around that. One is that the age range that you're speaking to is one of like prepubescent into puberty. We have another massive internal vulnerability at that stage of our lifespan development, right? So when we think about the rush of hormones and let's go back to infancy for a moment. Part of what's happening and why infancy is considered to be a critical phase of development and neuroplasticity in the brain is there are so many growth hormones and oxytocin, and there's like a very kind of high degree where those early experiences get imprinted into the wiring of our nervous system. Jump ahead into adolescence, same kind of thing is happening where we're very vulnerable. It's another critical phase of development. There's a lot of change happening all at once inside of me, outside of me. I'm attracted to everything in the world. Whoa, like what's going on here? Who am I? And then we go through another big loss. Now, maybe that big loss is held really well. Maybe that big loss is something that the adults around me help me navigate. They help me process my big emotions. They hold me through it. There's some waves, but ultimately we navigate those wobbles, and I'm actually leaning into that robust early wiring of my nervous system that happened in the good enough attachment. And that would be something that we would call a tolerable stress response. There's still a stress in there, but it's not a toxic stress. All right. Conversely, let's imagine a kind of situation like that where there's nobody to turn to, nobody's available, they're all preoccupied, all of those adults with their own grief or their own loss, and I feel completely dropped at that time. And then maybe on top of that, personal loss in my own family, there's things that are going on with friends and my social identity, and it becomes like a snowball impact. Then we can start to see that the impact of that would be more traumatic.
Mm.
That totally makes sense.
I'm thinking of a really difficult stage in life for women where so often as women are going through menopause or perimenopause, they have a child also going through puberty. And potentially at the exact same time, they have an aging parent who needs support. And so it's this like trauma sandwich with all the chemicals and hormones just going haywire and very little support likely, especially in our world these days where people are lonelier than ever and more isolated than ever. So, like in a situation like that, how would you work with someone who is in that sandwich and in a really under-resourced place with a lot of stimulation and a lot of demand that you can't really say, "Oh, sorry, I'm not going to deal with this," because this is life. And the way that we move through life, sometimes we just have to meet it and do the best we can. But maybe there's something you can offer for people who are in that situation that could be just something they could hold on to for a little more support or some practices that would help them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that in some ways you've brought in a really key word in your question, which is there was not enough resource to navigate the challenge. And we can think in economic terms to some degree here of there's stressors, but do I have a sufficient reservoir of resource to navigate those challenges of a kiddo going through puberty, I'm going through menopause, my parents are going through illness or transitions. And and then if we determine there's not enough resource, whether that's internal resource or external sources of resource, that's where we have to start. And it's one of the reasons why in my new book, the Polyvagal Theory Workbook for Trauma, the whole point of it is, yeah, thank you, is to really work on resourcing and regulating the nervous system rather than jumping right into the trauma-related material, right? So we're going to start by really exploring what's the missing piece? What can we bring in that's going to help me navigate those stressors out there with a more robust internal capacity? That might be, hey, during that phase, I need a really good co-regulator. I need someone that basically is just going to be there for me, a therapist or whoever that might be, where I can go in, unpack the suitcase every week of everything that I'm carrying and feel so held and also be given some tools and skills to use on my own between sessions so that I can come back to rhythmic breathing, paced breathing, doing that 3 times a day. I can come back into experimenting with non-sleep deep rest. I can experiment with eating really well and taking really good care. Like, what would be the things that feel accessible during a time when I already feel overstretched? And I think too often people feel like I don't have time to add anything more. And so what I love about natural vagus nerve stimulation is that it's very short and it's something that you can do throughout your day pretty quickly for it to have an impact. Now, one thing, and I don't know if your other speakers touched on this, but when we look at natural vagus nerve stimulation, that research relies upon some of the research on the electroceutical devices that provide vagus nerve stimulation, either through surgically implanted devices or devices that are wearable that stimulate the vagus nerve through the skin, either attaching to the ear or wrapping around the neck. So those devices have been shown to be really effective for a wide-ranging set of symptoms, everything from rheumatoid arthritis to epilepsy, migraines, depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress symptoms. And one of the things that we know about those devices is that we need to use them regularly for them to be effective. Even the surgically implanted ones, they're stimulating the vagus nerve several times an hour. So when we think about bringing in input to regulate the vagus nerve, it's not so much about having to carve out an hour of my day. I don't have that hour of my day right now, but I can do a simple practice of massaging the tragus, which is the bit of cartilage in front of the ear. I can do that pretty quickly and get a little bit of vagus nerve stimulation into the system, right? I can do a little bit of havening touch or self massage of the face. And besides, it's like a natural facelift. So why not? I
It's
can,
around the right around the lymph areas, isn't it, as I'm watching?
yes,
All the lymph
exactly.
stuff that I was doing with facial yoga.
Totally.
Goodness
Facial
gracious.
yoga is also stimulating your vagus nerve. So just saying, like there's a lot of crossover here. But what I like about these simple practices, and you can do them for 2 minutes here, 2 minutes there, is you're starting to feel like, whoa, my kid's going out of control, hormones, all this thing. I'm getting the hot flash. I'm just gonna do this for 30 seconds. Okay, got my breath back on, let's keep going. So there are little things that you can add in throughout your day.
The other thing we had talked about was breath work,
Yeah.
how important that is. The nose breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, making sure that the exhale is longer than the inhale because we know the stress breathing, usually into the mouth. It's
Right. That's right.
the long inhale and a very short exhale. And then everybody wonders why they get so tight up here. It's like you've been doing shrugs all day and just not paying attention to that. So even if you did the little face yoga touch that you're talking about, think of doing that with the breath work. Oh, you're going to be chill.
It's so true. And honestly, one of the go-tos that I think is really valuable with the breath work is going into paced breathing as well as that longer exhale. We know like the 4-7-8
For
breath.
7, 8.
Yeah, or even just a 4-8 breath is so powerful for tapping into the parasympathetic. Here's the challenge that I see a lot is that some people get stuck in the shutdown. It's like they've actually had the gas pedal pressed pedal to the metal for so long of that sympathetic that they've burned out that sympathetic system. system, whether you call it adrenal fatigue or basically post exercise malaise symptoms, like the kinds of symptoms that can lead one to feel like I can't even get out of bed. I am so done. I am so in that shutdown mode. And so coming back into the sympathetic is actually your medicine. It's not always going in towards the parasympathetic. So that's where get to know your nervous system comes in so that we can actually fine tune that prescription in a sense. So sometimes actually being able to key into enough of the sympathetic where I don't go into the rubber band effect or I go into sympathetic back into shutdown, but I can actually start to tolerate some of the sympathetic. And that's where a 5 count in, a 5 count out, which is built into a lot of our smart devices and all of and the apps and so forth, can be really valuable as well.
Mhm. It's interesting too that I think sometimes people will have their kind of habituated responses in stress. So some people will go into an isolated shutdown cocoon mode. Other people will go into overfunctioning and anxiety. And I had this experience in the pandemic. Right after kind of it hit its peak, I was really burned out. And I think so many of the mental health workers at the time I was just taking on way more than I should have and felt really responsible for helping everyone's mental health at the time, which is just a codependent response, I think, honestly. But what I decided at that time is I needed a sabbatical. And so I started to work towards what became a 5 month sabbatical. And then the week before I went on sabbatical, I got COVID. And so I couldn't close out with some of my clients. It was just a really tough time. And it also coincided with a skin surgery for cancer. I was like, I have cancer on my face. It was just so many things. And I tend to go into sympathetic when I have any dysregulation. I'm pretty comfortable with anxiety at this stage. Like I've learned how to manage it, but really that's my default. But what happened then is I went down into that dorsal vagal activation of being really shut down, like just heavy, sad. I felt the closest to depression I've ever felt in my life, where
Mm,
anxiety, I'm like, oh, I know anxiety, we can do this, but I don't know depression. I don't know this level of sadness. And
mm.
it was such a learning experience for me to experience, oh, this is what low feels like. And I wonder, do you think I went into that low place because I had burned out the sympathetic, or do you think it was just situational?
I'm going to ask a question for you, and you can choose whether to answer it. But when you touched the low, and sometimes pockets of our nervous system are holding valuable information for us, like memories or emotions or stories. So when you touched the low, did you feel that there was a part of yourself that you were able to connect to by slowing down that much?
That's a good question. I remember feeling young. I remember feeling little girl grief of being like, "Oh my gosh, I wish there was someone to take care of me."
Yeah.
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 'Cause I think in sympathetic, I feel very capable of taking care of myself, even though I might be wired really tightly and go into some more rigid, controlling type of anxiety behaviors. But the difference of this one was it was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm alone in the world and nobody loves me. Nobody is gonna take care of me. I'm not sure if I'll be okay."
That was me the last 8 months. It's so funny hearing you, I'm getting emotional
Mhm.
just hearing you talk about it because I'm thinking I went through all of that, and yet my sympathetic really was in overdrive because I couldn't I wanted to keep moving. So I would burn out, and then you have the burnout and this sadness, this isolation feeling.
Mhm.
And so that really, what you just talked about really hit home with me as well. And the interesting thing was, I do track heart rate variability, and I was down in the I got down into the 30s, which for me is very low. I'm sitting at 66 right now. So you can see what a big difference. And I kept watching it go down and down and down.
Mhm.
And that's frustrating. Like the more you see that going, what else do I need to do? It was so much of that stress and not coming out of it. Interestingly enough, I started focusing on prayer. I took my little remember that one week I said, you know what? I'm not doing anything
Mhm.
work-wise. I'm putting it all away and went into the mountains, like, hiked, got on my paddleboard, just got out
Yeah.
of that mode, and again, into more prayer, really started doing the 4-7-8 at bedtime, waking up, doing my meditation, and, like, within 6 weeks, I'm at a 66 HRV.
Mhm.
Big difference. So I'm only bringing my story in here to show that I really consciously put these tools into effect, the right foods, getting to bed at the right hour. I was staying up way too late because my cortisol was so off, right? All these things we like most people don't recognize. They just know they feel like crap. But I think it's really funny how we had similar, and we're both true mesomorphs. We both run on noradrenaline, testosterone. So there's that initial response
Mhm.
and how hard it is to come down from that.
Yeah.
So I think it's just really interesting. We both reacted the same way, where we shouldn't pull away. We should be reaching out. But yet that feeling of I just want to isolate. And what does it do? It drives that sympathetic even more because Dr. Schwartz, you're talking about connection. And to feel so disconnected, it made us feel less safe. And we both had childhood traumas, made us feel less safe and isolate more, which was the last thing we should do to be stimulating that vagus nerve. So I just think it's really interesting how both of us, like, yeah, I think it's just really interesting.
I think so.
Think
In
of it as like growth, honestly,
Yeah.
to be experiencing dysregulation in a new way means that something in the system has changed. And even if it's uncomfortable and painful, and for me, it was scary because I'm like, oh my God, is this ever going to go away? Because I go to a forever place when I'm in discomfort of, okay, this is it, rest of my life.
Not going to change.
So when I was able to work with my thoughts and reframe it, I was like, no, maybe it's good that we didn't go to sympathetic. Maybe it's good we're experiencing dorsal vagal because now we get to put the body in a new state, experience a new outcome, take some wisdom from this, and come back to that ventral vagal activation of being balanced again from a different trajectory because I'm so familiar with the other one. Let's explore something new.
So let's bring in a little bit of that kind of spiritual heart, soulful element of this. I think that pockets of our nervous system carry very important parts of us. And there's a way in which sometimes when we finally stop running, we finally stop, go, 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 and we slow down enough, even though maybe part of us is still afraid that if I slow down, I'm going to fall into the abyss. But guess what? If we go into that abyss or that void or that deep slowing, there's a part of you, a little girl that's saying, "Are they gonna come? Are they gonna come pick me up? Who's gonna care for me?" And you get to meet that part of you, and you get to, in a sense, do a little bit of soul retrieval and bring that part back and let her know that you're gonna see her and you're gonna feel that and you're gonna be with that. You're not gonna run from this anymore. That's huge. And you're starting to develop a trust with yourself that you can go into that deep, slow rhythm and it's safe to go there. You can meet the parts of you that maybe got lost in there. And you get to bring compassion or your adult self holding that part of you that lives in that nervous system.
Yeah. It's so corrective because in the psychotherapy field, we call it reparenting, where you get to show up for yourself the way that the adult caregivers maybe couldn't or weren't able to or didn't know how to back then. But we know now. And especially with all the resources, I think this is something that's accessible to everyone. There's so much inner child healing that we can all engage. And when we can show up for ourselves with that kind of safety that may not have been there for us before, the nervous system learns like, oh, it's not always unsafe. It just used to be that way. And now I have something I didn't used to have.
That's right. That's right. And I think for me that part of it is can we anchor enough of cues of safety so that when we go into the cocoon that we feel safe enough to go within, to be settled, to be quiet. When I'm going into my cocoon, and speaking of perimenopause and menopausal years, like I've had my migraine hormonal migraines for many, many years. and it initiates a bit of a cocooning for me, and part of working with them has actually been, like, "Don't fight this, let yourself rest." It takes me into rest, and I go into that, and I usually let my husband or a good friend of mine know, "Hey, I'm cocooning for a little bit, just keep me in heart, keep me in mind," and then I go into rest. I'm actually not in a ton of pain when I surrender to rest, and I let myself just be in that held space, and whatever young parts of me or whatever tender places in me need to be known in that slowing down.
I love that.
Yeah.
You know what we didn't do was inform Dr. Schwartz of your question.
Oh,
Sure.
I love this
So I
question.
think this is going to be a good one.
Yeah. Are we ready? Dr. Schwartz, is there anything else? So the question is the way that we wrap up the interview. But before we do, is there anything else that you think we didn't ask that you really want to share today or that feels called forward for you?
I feel like we touched some really beautiful material, especially as we looped around young parts of us and the ways in which, like, whether we had a great co-regulator in our earliest years that shaped our internal regulation system, or we didn't have them. Maybe the most important thing to know is that we get to essentially rewire and regulate our nervous systems throughout our lifespan. And that's why we can tune into and tap into other people that have that robust resource for us and that we're here for each other. It becomes this really beautiful cycle of giving and receiving co-regulation, and in that process, elevating each other to what I think is our greatest potential.
Mm, that's
And
beautiful.
also, when you look at people that live the longest, right? The longevity, the blue zones community. So I wonder, does that play a part? Because we know stress creates inflammation, creates disease, which is typically a shorter lifespan when it's out of control. So I've been pulling that together in your interview and the one before. I'm thinking, I wonder if that really plays a part, but you especially with the community part of it.
Yeah.
We need each other. We need each other. People, everyone out there that's so bitter, I don't need anybody. Yet you do. If you want to live longer, you really do. We're not supposed to be alone. It's just not how we're wired. And so for me, it really sinks in that feeding that part of us really can help with longevity, turning up the really good genes. When you talk about with your migraines and you're not feeling the pain as much, that just says to me that you're turning down some genes there that were dialed up. So there's the epigenetic expression, and we have so much control over that. And even just bringing that part into it, our mind, the connection, how we think, working with all this, I think makes a really big difference. All right, Kate, back to you.
Okay, so we've devised a question that we like to ask at the end just to bring you as a guest into a humanized place for our listeners. So, my work is the Radiant Life Project, which is my psychotherapeutic perspective towards really helping live the life of vibrancy that I think we all can live. And Susan's work is on epigenetics and working with your diet and lifestyle to turn up those good genes. And so, both of those things happen in the now. It's about what we practice day in and day out, how we show up for ourselves, not just what we say we'll do or what we hope to do someday, but what we're really doing now. So, my question is, how are you in your present life cultivating your radiant life through epigenetics?
Beautiful. Thank you for the question. It's lovely. There's something for me about this experience, both as a writer, as an author, and also as a teacher of polyvagal informed practices, that when I get to offer the tools around nervous system regulation and compassion based practices, which is so deeply tied into that, resilience informed work, which is what I call my work, the Center for Resilience Informed Therapy, that there is a way in which I know I am living that life purpose, as I think both of you are describing as well. I deeply believe in this profoundly hurting world that we share, that we can change this world one nervous system at a time. And that aligns me into my soul's purpose and it lights me up so that I wake up and I literally say, I get to do this today. And that's a great feeling.
Mhm.
Love it. Love it.
Beautiful. So,
Mhm.
for our listeners who want to know more about you, want to find you, where would you guide them to learn more about your work?
Right. One thing is you can just Google Dr. Arielle Schwartz and you'll probably find some of those places. But one of my websites is Dr. Arielle Schwartz. Resilience Informed Therapy is my other website. And on YouTube, I have some 250 videos on there around vagus nerve yoga and vagus nerve regulation. And that's at Dr. Arielle Schwartz on YouTube, Dr. Arielle Schwartz on Facebook, and Arielle Schwartz Boulder on Instagram.
Yeah.
One has to
You're all
be
over
a
the
little different.
place.
Yeah.
Thank you. I know that people are going to benefit so much from this as I have. And really, your most recent polyvagal theory workbook, I'm getting so much out of it. It's so much more than a workbook. It has so much teaching. There are photographs of you like showing the experiences that you're offering. It's very accessible for the everyday person, and I'm personally gaining a lot from it. So thank you for that resource and for all the other books and teachings that you put in the world, and for this conversation, because I hope that people will benefit from it and share it and give it to their loved ones so that really one nervous system at a time, we can all become more regulated and improve this world.
Thank you. Thank you.
Please, please, please share this podcast, everybody, because this is something that affects every one of us. It affects every one of us in different ways. You're going to reach somebody, and you may make that difference in one person, their life. So please share this. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Schwartz. This has been just a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I got to learn a lot because this was new to me, so much of it. So thank you so much. And everybody, get out there, make it a great day, and be your most authentic self. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for tuning into our podcast.
If you enjoyed this week's episode, we'd love for you to share it, leave a review or comment, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Help us get this information out to everyone who could benefit, and we'll keep bringing you the content you crave.
You can also check out our podcast site at everydayepigenetics.co and sign up for our newsletter to stay updated on upcoming episodes. The link is in the show notes.
If you're interested in DNA or epigenetic coaching with Susan, or Radiant Life Coaching for deep inner work with Kate, our contact info is in the show notes below.
Now go and make it a great day and let your most authentic self shine.